The first program which I would be coding using the C language is to compute the area of a circle. Well, this happens to be circle, which is one of the geometric shapes. Now, if in case I have to compute the area of this circle, then obviously I need to have the radius of the circle. Let's assume that the radius of this circle happens to be 5. Then what is going to be the area of this circle? Well, I'm sure that during your school days you would know this formula, that the area of a circle can be computed using the formula that area is equal to pi r square. And you know that the value of pi happens to be 3.141. And that way, if you will substitute and compute the area of the circle, you would be getting it as 78.5. But then, you know, we need to achieve this using C language. So, how is it that we can write the program using C language? How is it that I would give to my C language program the input as 5, that is the radius, and it gives me the output, that is the area, as 78.5. How does all that happen? Let me tell you. In as far as writing the program to compute the area of the circle in C language is concerned, the first thing that I will have to do is to create the two variables. Yes, I need to be creating the variable called radius as well as the variable called area. But then, what really is a variable and where does this get created? Well, this question would take us to the hardware of a computer. And let me tell you that a computer happens to be a device in which 5 units must compulsorily be present. We should have something called as the input unit, something called as the output unit, something called the memory unit, the processing unit, and to control all of this, we definitely will have to have the control unit. Anyway, moving ahead, I would be speaking in greater detail about these hardware components, but what I really want you to understand now is that when you are going to create variables, then the memory is going to get allocated for these variables on the memory unit. Well, how many locations are allocated on the memory unit? How is really the data stored in this memory unit? All of that anyway would be taken in greater detail moving forward in the further videos, but at this point in time, what I want you to understand is that radius is a variable which is created so that I can store 5.0 in the variable called radius. Not just that, I have also created another variable called area, because you know that area has to hold the value of pi r square. And how do we really do that? Well, in case of C language, the mathematical formula pi r square can be implemented like this. Yes, it is 3.141 star radius star radius. But then what I also want you to understand is that C language happens to be a statically typed programming language. Yes, in fact, it happens to be one of the features of C language. And I'm sure now already there would be a question at the back of your mind as to what really is a statically typed programming language. Well, don't get confused with this hi-fi term called the statically typed programming language. All that it really means is that whenever you are going to create a variable, you should also specify the data type of the variable. That is what it means. And definitely for people who have watched the Java Series 1, definitely the concept of data types would be completely clear. But then what I want you to understand is that the two variables that you have created here in the program, radius as well as area, we need to specify the data type. We cannot just specify that as radius and area and just leave it blank without specifying the data type, because as I told you, C language happens to be a statically typed programming language, and hence it is a compulsion for us to actually be specifying explicitly the data type. I would wish to say here that if in case you are coding the same program using a dynamically typed programming language like Python. Yes, if at all you are coding the program using the Python language, then just specifying the variables would have been sufficient. There wouldn't have been any necessity for me, the programmer, to explicitly specify the data type. That is because Python happens to be a dynamically typed programming language, but then C is not a dynamically typed programming language. It is a statically typed programming language, and hence it is a compulsion for me as a programmer to compulsorily specify the data type of the variable. And if you'll ask me what are the different data types that are available in C, well, these are all the different data types that are available in C. Well, that way you know that in Java these were the data types that were available. That way what I have to tell you is that in case of C language, there indeed are lesser number of data types when compared to Java, but then the larger question is, what should I be declaring the radius as? What should I be declaring the area as? And I'm sure by now you would have understood that I will have to declare the radius as of type float because it has to hold real numbers. Also, I will have to be declaring area also as of type float because even there the real numbers have to be stored. Any which way, these 4 lines of code would definitely help me in computing the area of the circle. But then I need to actually display it as well. At this point in time, what would have happened is that the area, that is 78.5, would have been computed by the microprocessor, but then it would have placed it within the memory unit itself like this. You know, I need to actually be displaying this on the display unit. After all, you know that the computer has a total of 5 units, and what really is going to be visible to me as a programmer is whatever is displayed on the screen. But then the way you have written the program as of now, we really don't have anything on the display, which means that I need to have a statement included in my program so that the output is displayed on the output unit. And let me tell you, we have something called as the printf facility to help us do that. Now, at this point in time, just remember this much, that printf is a facility which is there in C language, which will help the programmer to display whatever he would wish to display on the output device. At this point in time, I want to display this message that the area of the circle happens to be, and then I'm going to be printing the area. Of course, I'm sure you would be confused about that %f. In fact, there are a lot of things that I really will have to be clarifying to you, but at this point in time, what I can tell you is that this printf statement is going to ensure that the area of the circle is going to get displayed on the monitor. But then all of this, we need to be enclosing it within a function called the main function. Now, why is it that we really have to enclose it within the main function? Again, I would definitely be communicating each of that moving forward, but then this is the way that I can be actually placing it within the main function. And if really this program has to execute, then you also have to have this. Yes, the hash include stdio.h. I'm sure that in the very first video of the C series, there are a lot of things that I have specified here which may not be clear to you at all at this point in time, but I'm sure coming from a mathematical background, at least you are able to understand this formula. And if really you have to make use of the formula, then the value of the radius is important. So it means that you have understood this statement as well. And obviously, if you want to make use of the variable radius, if you want to make use of the variable area, then this is the way you firstly have to create it. Obviously, without creating the variables, how are you going to use it? And as I have told you, since C language happens to be a statically typed programming language, whenever you are going to create variables, obviously you have to specify the data type. Well, I could have still specified the data type as int, but then I'm sure all of you know mathematically that The area need not always necessarily be an integer. It could be a real number which has a decimal point in it, which is why, to be on the safer side, I have declared both of these variables as of type float. And then finally, you know that the print statement is present there so that we can see the output on the screen, and then it is the expectation of C programming language. It is the expectation of Dennis Ritchie that all of this has to be put within the main function, and that is what we have done there. And of course, the hash include happens to be a preprocessor directive. Now, that could again create some kind of a confusion at the back of your mind at this point in time, but all said and done, I am sure a major part of this program you have been able to understand. Anyway, what next are we supposed to do after the coding is done? Let me tell you. Now that your program is ready, I will have to compile the program. I will have to execute the program. Well, again, two new terms: compilation, execution. What really is the meaning of the term compilation? Even otherwise, moving ahead, I will be speaking about it in greater detail. But for me, as of now, I would wish to see the output. That is what is really important for me. And upon execution, this is the output which we would be getting. And as you can notice, we have got the expected output indeed. In other words, what you have now been able to achieve is that you have coded your first program using C language. But then I would also wish to say that the program that you have coded is such a program which never took any inputs from you. You know that you have coded your program in a manner where you are already specifying the radius as 5. Well, I would wish to rewrite this program in a manner where the program should ask me to enter the radius. Well, I can enter the radius as 5, I can enter the radius as 5.5, I can enter the radius as 10.5, I can enter it as whatever I want. But at this point in time, the way you have written the program, you can notice that when you will begin to execute the program is not at all asking you for the radius, because you have already hard-coded the value of the radius there. Yes, that is what is called as hard coding, that you are putting the value of the radius in the program itself. That is not a good style of programming. You should be writing your program in a manner where the program should ask you, the programmer, to key in the radius. You will have the liberty to key in whatever radius value that you want to key in, and then definitely the program has to be giving you the output. Well, how to make those modifications is something which anyway I would be telling you moving forward, but at this point in time, you have been able to code your first C program. Though everything in the program is not clear, at least you have been able to understand as to how really programming is done. And what really is a program? Well, a program is nothing but a set of instructions. It is a set of instructions that you are giving to your computer in order to perform a certain task. Don't you think this is an instruction? Well, that is the instruction to create the variables. Don't you think this is an instruction? That is an instruction in which you are telling that you want to store 5.0 inside the variable called radius. Don't you think this is an instruction? After all, it is a mathematical formula, and you are telling your computer to use this mathematical formula and compute the area, and definitely print also is an instruction by which you are telling that whatever is the result which is finally available in the memory unit should be displayed on the monitor. In other words, all of these happen to be instructions. So then what is a program? Well, a program, as I have told you, is a collection of instructions. It is a collection of instructions which we give to the computer in order to achieve a certain task. Well, I have achieved my task, the task of computing the area of a circle. Any which way, moving ahead, I am going to dissect this and dive deeper and tell you a lot more, but I am sure now you've been able to understand as to how you can code a program using C language and how really you can compile and execute it. Now that you've been able to code your first program using C language, it's time that I introduce you to the general structure of the C program. Yes, there is something called as the general structure which every C program has to fit into. Now, who has given this general structure? Well, the inventor of C language has given it, that is Dennis Ritchie has given this general structure. What we as programmers will have to do is to ensure that whenever we are making use of the C language to code our programs, we will have to abide by this general structure. Obviously, we will have to abide by it. After all, we are making use of Dennis Ritchie's language in order to achieve our task. And you know that by making use of Dennis Ritchie's C language, you have achieved your task of computing the area of the circle after all. But then, does your program fit into the general structure? Well, obviously it has to fit into the general structure, without which you would never have been able to get the output. And if you would ask me what really the general structure is, well, this happens to be the general structure. And as you can notice, every C program has to begin with a preprocessor directive, and that is what has been indicated there. Now, preprocessor directives are something which begins with the hash symbol, and I am sure now you understand that this happens to be our preprocessor directive. Not just that, in the general structure, it is also specified that if at all there are any global variable declarations, then those global variable declarations will have to be made below the preprocessor directives. Well, at this point in time in my program, there are no global variables used, and hence I may not be able to at this point in time tell you as to what really a global variable is. Any which way, moving ahead, I would be speaking about it. But then, as of the general structure, you can notice that we have to have a main method, a main function, and we indeed have the main function. And then within the main function, the general structure specifies that we should be providing the local declarations first. Well, in my program, as you can notice, the two declaration statements that we have with respect to the variables called radius as well as area, these happen to be our local declarations. Well, not just that, the general structure also specifies that we need to have the executable statements after the local variable declarations, and these statements is what we refer to as the executable statements. Well, you can also notice that in the general structure, there is something called as the user-defined functions. Well, at this point in time, I am sure you are able to notice that we have just one function, that is the main function. We have not coded any other function. In other words, we don't have anything called as the user-defined function in as far as our first program is concerned. But all said and done, I am sure as my learner, you have been able to correlate the program with the general structure, and that you realize that definitely our program fits into the general structure. Yes, a few components might not be present. We may not have global variables in our program. We might not have other user-defined functions in our program. And what really is global variables, what really are user-defined functions is not very clear at this point in time. Obviously, moving ahead, I am sure you would be able to understand everything that you have to know about this mother of all programming languages. I am sure in this video you have been able to gather sufficient knowledge about this programming language. A language which really was born way before many of you were born. A language which, even though is pretty old, is very much relevant and is still the #1 language. Definitely, moving ahead, you would get to know everything that you have to know about this #1 programming language. But I am sure now you've been able to understand both the first program of C that you have coded, as well as you've been able to correlate it with the general structure. In my next video, I would be diving deeper into the concepts of C language and making you completely understand the concept. See you in my next session.